In the land of eternity, many powerful beings gathered to watch the impending confrontation between the cultivator camp and the ice peak camp. The spectators were completely unfazed by the coming chaos and were even looking forward to the battle. Some believed that the cultivator camp would lose the initial clash, while the ice peak camp might be unable to endure a prolonged war. Others even hoped that the conflict would become so intense that the entire cultivator territory of the 3,600 world groups would be reduced to ruins. However, some pointed out that if the territory truly collapsed, the 8 cultivator lords would no longer have any concerns, which would make the situation even more terrifying. Besides the 8 cultivator lords of the cultivator camp and the 12 undying and undying entities of the ice peak camp, the other 9 undying and undying entities also sent avatars to the land of eternity. These included the infinite snake ancestor, inference fire ancestor, initial ancestor, and mother of spacetime from the innate primordial camp, as well as 5 unaffiliated experts, Mogus, Kafu, feather emperor, demon ruins, and hermit. Among these 5 unaffiliated beings, 4 possessed strength sufficient to rank within the top 10 of the entire infinite primordial space. The hermit was the only exception, as his strength was unknown and he was the only being in the infinite primordial space whose true body could not be found. All 5 lived freely without joining any faction. Kafu, wearing white battle armor, laughed and said that the more intense the battle became, the better it was. He then addressed the infinite snake ancestor, pointing out that the innate primordial camp had fought the cultivator camp for a long time in the past and had lost quite a few ancestors. If the ice peak camp now entered into a large-scale war with the cultivator camp, several ancestors would probably die as well. The infinite snake ancestor remained indifferent, stating that only through life and death trials was there hope of improving one's strength, and those who died could only blame themselves for not being strong enough. Unlike the cultivator lords, who were all undying and undying, among the more than 100 ancestors who had participated in the previous war from the innate primordial camp, only a small number were undying and undying, while most of them faced the threat of death. Under that pressure, they fought many battles against the cultivator camp. Some ancestors who survived had gained valuable insights and opportunities, but they needed time to slowly assimilate those gains. Mogus, surrounded by a chilling aura, also declared that there were too many ancestors and that weaker ancestors should be eliminated. He pointed out that the ice peak camp possessed 26 ordinary ancestors and suggested that some of them should die as well. Kafu then asked Mogus whether he was aware that more than 95% of his power had already been wiped out. Mogus sneered and asked whether Kafu could fight against Starlight. Kafu admitted that he might not be able to defeat Starlight, but Starlight could not do anything to him either. He then mocked Mogus, saying that unlike him, who could only bully the weak and was helpless against Starlight, Kafu was not in such a position. Mogus could only snort coldly. Demon ruins, a mysterious cubic being sitting beside the absolute spherical initial ancestor, then asked whether the initial ancestor had recently visited the fire prison wall. The two had deep ties, and during the ancient era, before the various factions had been established, the initial ancestor, Sha Zhou, and demon ruins had already been familiar with one another. The infinite primordial space contained several mysterious lands, whose strength varied greatly. Some were so powerful that even the strongest ancestors could not see any hope of refining and controlling them. The fire prison wall was one such place. It was an endless, majestic wall stretching for roughly 100 world groups in length, while its width was comparable to an entire world group. Among all the mysterious lands, its vastness ranked within the top 3. 99% of the ancestors who dared to approach the fire prison wall would be reduced to ashes. Wulin had once attempted to enter it but was severely burned and had immediately retreated. Unable to venture deeper, the only being capable of traversing the entire fire prison wall was the initial ancestor. The initial ancestor explained that Yan Huo, Sha Zhou, and several old friends had asked for his assistance, so he had led them to the fire prison wall. When demon ruins asked whether they had found the origin of the fire prison wall, the initial ancestor answered that they had not. Inference fire ancestor, who was nearby, added that although they had traversed the entire fire prison wall, they still could not sense its origin. Kafu remarked that if even they could not sense the origin, then refining it was even more impossible. Inference fire ancestor then described the terrifying powers they had discovered within the fire prison wall. The highest level of flame power they had encountered had accumulated to 12 different types. Icy flames could freeze ancestors. Endless scorching flames could burn everything. Thunder fire possessed terrifying destructive power. Ash flame could annihilate everything. And there were also other terrifying flames such as violent flame. The overlapping coverage of multiple types of flames was so dangerous that only the initial ancestor could traverse it. The infinite snake ancestor explained that if the fire prison wall truly possessed an origin, then its origin would contain at least 12 types of highest level power. Refining it would therefore require mastering nearly half of those highest level powers. Yet, among all the creatures in the infinite primordial space, even the strongest beings could master at most 2 highest level powers. For this reason, the fire prison wall was considered impossible to refine. Inference Fire Ancestor also acknowledged that it was indeed impossible. Nevertheless, every ancestor who excelled in flame-related powers naturally harbored ambitions toward the fire prison wall. If someone could truly control such a terrifying mysterious land, their strength would certainly rise dramatically. Inference Fire Ancestor, who was currently one of the 9 emperors and possessed strength only slightly inferior to the Infinite Snake Ancestor, might even surpass the Infinite Snake Ancestor after mastering the fire prison wall and potentially contend for the strongest position in the entire infinite primordial space. However, places such as the fire prison wall, the land of eternity, and the abyss of destruction were all famous for their overwhelming power and were regarded as having no hope of being refined. Meanwhile, inside a vast and majestic palace, the 12 entities of the Ice Peak camp had gathered together, including the Ice Peak Ancestor. One of the grand figures pointed toward a scene in midair showing the 8 cultivator lords traveling toward their target. He stated that the intentions of the 8 cultivator lords were obvious. If the Ice Peak camp attempted to seize control of those world groups, the cultivator lords would directly initiate a war. At that moment, Shu Saiwei, whose body resembled yellow stone, glared furiously at the others. He declared that he had not encroached upon a single world group within the cultivator territory and had not taken any share of its resources. Therefore, regardless of whether the others chose to participate in the coming war, Shu Saiwei firmly stated that he would not participate. Shu Saiwei refused to participate in the war, arguing that although the 12 undying beings of the Ice Peak camp were a collective, he would not join the battle simply because the others had made a collective decision. The 3 rulers of Fenglei Si angrily rebuked him, insisting that all 12 were one whole, while Wugu Ancestor also supported the idea that they should act together. Shu Saiwei, however, sneered and asked what they could do to him if he refused to participate. Ice Peak Ancestor felt extremely troubled by the situation. The Ice Peak camp possessed 12 undying beings and 26 ancestors, making it appear extremely powerful. But precisely because its upper-level members were all powerful undying existences, they were difficult to control. Even the 3 rulers of Fenglei Si, who were the weakest among the 12 undying beings, were already troublesome to deal with. Some members believed that the Ice Peak camp was evenly matched with the 8 lords of the cultivator camp and had an additional 26 ancestors, giving them an absolute advantage once the war began. They wanted to crush the cultivator camp, occupy more territory, and make it clear that any alliance with the Ice Peak camp had to be led by the Ice Peak camp. Others, however, pointed out that the cultivator camp had already become powerful enough to fight against the innate primordial camp, which consisted of hundreds of ancestors, so it was no longer a weak force that would fear the Ice Peak camp. Shu Saiwei stated that he had never invaded the cultivator territory or sought resources there, and therefore his position was clear: he would definitely not join the war. After saying this, he directly disappeared from the gathering. The 3 rulers of Fenglei Si became furious when they realized that Pu Cheng had also left early. But Ice Peak Ancestor told them to stop making noise. He wanted to expel the 3 rulers of Fenglei Si from the Ice Peak camp. But the 12 existences from the Land of Eternity had formed an alliance together in the past, and without a sufficient reason, it was difficult to expel them directly. Ice Peak Ancestor then announced that Pu Cheng had clearly refused to participate and asked the others about their own positions. Shu Saiwei again declared that he would not join the battle. He explained that the Ice Peak camp, like the innate primordial camp, needed large amounts of resources to develop its life cores, whereas the 8 lords of the cultivator camp primarily focused on enlightenment and did not care as much about resources. He could not understand why they needed to fall out with the cultivator camp simply because of the invasion of world groups. Some members argued that the cultivator camp had always relied on them. But after becoming powerful, it had now turned against them. Others believed that a war was necessary and that the ancestors who had relied on the Ice Peak camp and only enjoyed its resources should now be forced to fight desperately. Many of those present supported starting a war. Feeling increasingly troubled, Ice Peak ancestors secretly transmitted a message to Sha Zhou. The gray-clothed woman Sha Zhou looked at him and then glanced around the hall before declaring that the war was meaningless and that she also would not participate. Her decision immediately silenced the entire hall. Sha Zhou and Starlight Lord were among the two strongest existences in infinite primordial space. With Sha Zhou refusing to participate, and Pu Cheng and Shu Saiwei also absent, the Ice Peak camp could potentially lose the war. Although the three rulers of Fenglei were the weakest among the 12 undying beings, the remaining members were extremely powerful. Pu Cheng's strength was comparable to that of a cultivator lord, which was why he dared to leave first without caring about anyone's opinion. Shu Saiwei was also among the top 30 existences in endless primordial space. With Pu Cheng, Shu Saiwei, and Sha Zhou all refusing to participate, Ice Peak Ancestor concluded that the war lacked sufficient certainty and was not suitable to begin. He therefore proposed returning all the world groups that the Ice Peak camp had previously occupied. No one in the hall raised an objection. As Luo Feng, Yuan, and the other members of the cultivator camp traveled onward, Starlight Lord suddenly informed them that the Ice Peak camp had decided to retreat. Yuan was delighted by the news. The lords had been deeply concerned about the numerous creature worlds within their territories. Because most of the 12 undying beings of the Ice Peak camp were extremely belligerent and did not care about the lives of weaker beings. Shu Saiwei and Pu Cheng were among the few who cared about their own clans and were worried that a full-scale war would affect them. Starlight Lord then told Yuan to follow his lead during the upcoming negotiations with Ice Peak Ancestor. Yuan agreed because he trusted Starlight Lord's judgment. Half a day later, under the leadership of Starlight Lord, the 8 lords of the cultivator camp arrived at the border of the fallen territory. Ice Peak Ancestor and 5 other figures appeared on the side of the Ice Peak camp to receive them. Ice Peak Ancestor smiled and told Yuan not to be angry, explaining that Yuan had demanded war after issuing a warning, but he had barely managed to unify the internal opinions of the Ice Peak camp. Yuan asked what decision they had reached, and Ice Peak Ancestor replied that they would naturally return the occupied territories because there was no need for the two sides to go to war. Yuan, however, immediately rejected the idea that simply returning the territories was enough. He pointed out that the Ice Peak camp had acted ruthlessly while invading the cultivator territory, plundering resources wantonly and even devouring many source world origins. He therefore demanded that all resources stolen from the cultivator territory be returned as well, declaring that only then would the matter be considered settled. Otherwise, whoever had robbed the cultivator camp would be robbed twice as much in return. Ice Peak Ancestor frowned slightly, clearly unhappy, but eventually nodded and agreed to Yuan's demand. Wugu Ancestor and the 3 rulers of Fenglei became anxious because they had seized the greatest amount of resources and would have to return them. Ice Peak Ancestor firmly repeated that he had already promised to return them and told anyone who disagreed to negotiate with the cultivator camp personally. Wugu Ancestor and the 3 rulers of Fenglei could only endure the situation, because if they faced all 8 cultivator lords alone, they would be completely crushed. Ice Peak Ancestor then observed that the cultivator camp had changed. Compared with the past, its attitude had become much tougher when dealing with the Ice Peak camp. Yuan explained that he still needed to report the agreement to the other 7 lords, and Ice Peak Ancestor expressed his understanding. The two sides looked at each other and both understood that their relationship had changed. Soon afterward, the members of the Ice Peak camp departed, while Wugu Ancestor and the 3 rulers of Fenglei had to return all the resources they had plundered. Jin felt that the cultivator camp had been too lenient, arguing that because the Ice Peak camp had invaded their territory, they should have counter-plundered 10 times the amount that had been taken. Starlight Lord, however, explained that the cultivator camp's current strength was still insufficient. Forcing the Ice Peak camp to return the plundered resources was already the greatest result they could obtain. If they demanded more, Ice Peak Ancestor's pride would likely force him to start a war. And if he chose to fight, Sha Zhou would definitely join him. Luo Feng had only recently become a lord and had not interacted much with the Ice Peak camp. So he silently observed everything. In the end, the entire territory consisting of 3,600 world groups was completely recovered by the cultivator camp. Yuan smiled and acknowledged that Luo Feng's breakthrough to become a new lord had been extremely important. Without Luo Feng, no one knew what might have happened to the cultivator territory. The other lords also felt relieved and pleased, because after the Ice Peak camp returned all the occupied world groups, and agreed to return the plundered resources, the war could be considered a complete victory for the cultivator camp. The cultivator territory was completely reclaimed, allowing the 8 lords to finally relax. Yuan asked Starlight Lord to rearrange the damaged spacetime nets. But Starlight explained that although destroying them was easy, repairing the nets across several hundred world groups would require at least a millennium of work. The original expansion had deliberately focused on the densest group of the 3,600 worlds because distant world groups made the arrangement of spacetime nets extremely difficult. Starlight revealed that he had an important matter requiring Luo Feng's help. Believing that Luo Feng's mastery of the paths of life and death would give him the strength needed to assist. Luo Feng readily agreed because he greatly admired Starlight's immense contributions to the cultivator camp. Jin, Mo Man, and Ming Huang were also recognized as highly compatible partners for Luo Feng, as their cooperation could produce results greater than the sum of their individual strengths. Yuan then announced that the lords would begin rebuilding the territories that had been destroyed during the war. The cultivator territory entered a major reconstruction phase. While the heavily damaged innate primordial camp and the recently defeated Ice Peak camp no longer dared to provoke the cultivators, and weaker forces also remained hidden. Meanwhile, the 3,600 world groups gradually returned to their normal lives. In a source world of the Dark World Group, Yuan Shang Palace Master, the former city builder of Yulan City, was struggling alone against severe memory pollution caused by a high-level primordial life. After leaving Yulan City to Luo Feng, he had dismissed all his external avatars and returned to his source world to resist the pollution. But his consciousness had gradually become trapped in countless illusions. He could no longer distinguish reality from illusion, although his strong will to survive continued to resist and gave him hope that he had not completely succumbed. At that moment, Du Feng, his old friend and former guide on the path of cultivation, arrived after breaking through the sealed cave mansion. Du Feng used a drop of life dew bestowed by Luo Feng to cleanse the impurities in Yuan Shang Palace Master's soul and greatly strengthen it. Yuan Shang Palace Master immediately regained consciousness and became certain that he was seeing reality. Although the memory pollution remained, his strengthened soul was now powerful enough to suppress it, allowing him to return to peak condition and fully display his pinnacle strength. Du Feng explained that Luo Feng had sent the life dew and said that Yuan Shang Palace Master could visit him in the Dark World Group if he wanted the memory pollution to be completely erased. Luo Feng had also explained that once the soul became sufficiently strong, the pollution could become harmless and even serve as a form of tempering. Yuan Shang Palace Master was shocked to learn that Luo Feng had become a new great lord and that the cultivator camp, allied with Yuan, Jin, and the other lords, had completely defeated the innate primordial camp and won the war. The Dark World Group had also been greatly developed, with the Dark Sacred Realm becoming far more prosperous, Luo Feng's true body permanently residing there, and many high-level and world-level primordial life visiting him. Yuan Shang Palace Master remembered that, when Luo Feng had still been weak, he had recognized his potential and given him 50 billion primordial crystals. He realized that this past act of goodwill had now brought him a return worth far more than billions of times its original value. Although such a favor could only realistically be formed when the Lord was still weak. Afterward, Luo Feng, who remembered those who had shown him kindness, decided to travel to the land of eternity. He projected a mind into a void space near the distant land of eternity and gradually condensed an avatar. Because he was not going to war, a regular avatar was sufficient. Though it took approximately 1 Earth day to restore about 3/10,000ths of his energy reserves. This level was barely enough to be considered a weak avatar and was sufficient to defeat any world-level primordial life. Luo Feng then traveled toward the land of eternity, whose terrifying suppression of outsiders required his avatar to possess sufficient strength to avoid being crushed. After condensing a bloody robe from shadow power, he reached the land of eternity in an instant. The vast, flat land exerted considerable pressure on him, demonstrating that the environment was truly suited only to ancestor-level and lord-level life forms. At its center stood an ancient round table surrounded by 29 seats. A peculiar cubical structure called demon ruins welcomed Luo Feng, while Cafu informed him that his seat had already been prepared. The other immortal existences gradually appeared, and once Luo Feng left his imprint on his seat, he would be able to project there directly in the future without suffering the Land of Eternity's suppressive consequences. Soon, 28 figures were present, consisting of the 7 lords of the cultivator camp, 4 of the 9 emperors of the innate primordial camp, 12 beings from the ice peak camp, and 5 independent lords. Luo Feng refined his seat, and through the Land of Eternity, he sensed the other 28 existences. Demon Ruins then joyfully announced that the group had gained a new companion. Lord Luo Feng. These immortal and undying lords were the true eternal chess players of the endless primordial space. Unlike ancestors, who would cease to exist after falling. On this day, the eternal existences welcomed their new companion, Lord Luo Feng. The Land of Eternity's 29 beings rarely gathered together. During the gathering, Cafu asked Luo Feng when he would hold his celebration as a lord. Luo Feng explained that the Blood Crane territory, the mysterious land he controlled, was currently migrating back toward the cultivator territory, and the celebration would take place once it reached his hometown. Meanwhile, Demon Ruins invited Sha Zhou and others to explore Tong Valley, a mysterious valley nurtured by the endless primordial space where terrifying, unpredictable attacks descended. Only a few beings had crossed the entire valley, and its greatest benefit was allowing experts to experience attacks that surpassed all life forms, which could help them explore their own paths. Sha Zhou had visited the valley the most, and some of her killing techniques had been developed from studying its attacks. Luo Feng also observed the relationships among the 4 major factions: the innate primordial camp, cultivator camp, ice peak camp, and independent faction. The first 3 rarely paid attention to one another, while proposals from the independent faction were more likely to be accepted by all sides. He also noted that the 8 cultivator lords were different from the ancestors, who often gathered to adventure and explore treasures. The cultivator lords mainly relied on enlightenment and only occasionally explored mysterious lands that resonated with them, while their main concern was protecting the resources of the 3,600 world groups. After traveling for 10 eras, the Blood Crane territory finally arrived at the Dark World Group, which had been renamed the Galaxy World Group. While the Dark Sacred Realm had become the Galaxy Sacred Realm, the Blood Crane territory contained more than 7.5 billion high-level primordial life forms of the Blood Crane territory clan. Only a small portion remained under Luo Feng's command, while the others had been sent to work in the territories of other lords. This was also how the 8 cultivator lords generally handled high-level primordial and world-level primordial beings they personally enslaved, sharing them with the entire camp. Luo Feng's celebration then concluded, attracting an enormous number of guests. The innate primordial camp sent avatars, including 6 emperors and 31 ordinary ancestors, while the Ice Peak camp sent 21 avatars, along with representatives from many weaker forces. More than 100 ancestor avatars attended, and the number of spectators reflected the influence of the celebration's host within the endless primordial space. After the guests departed, only Lord Mo Man remained among the other 7 cultivator lords. Mo Man reminded Luo Feng of his previous promise to help him. He explained that there was a special mysterious land called the Fluctuation Land, which he could only discover once every 100,000 eras, and it would appear again in approximately 5,000 eras. Once it appeared, they would have to depart immediately. Luo Feng agreed without hesitation. After Mo Man left, Luo Feng finally had time to completely retreat and contemplate the primordial blade path. The Blood Crane territory was very close to the origin continent source world, allowing Luo Feng to move it there quickly if an unimaginable crisis arose. The endless Blood Sea could also fully protect the origin continent source world. Luo Feng believed that nothing should be able to threaten the source world where he personally resided. But his hometown source world was especially important because it was connected to the lives and safety of his relatives and friends. With the origin continent source world present, he could resurrect living beings. But if the source world were destroyed, resurrection would become impossible, so he had to ensure its safety. Meanwhile, Conflict continued throughout the endless primordial space. The Ice Peak Camp, having recently suffered setbacks against the Cultivator Camp, began bullying weaker forces and forcibly taking more resources, leading to fierce conflicts because those weaker forces refused to join the major camps. The innate primordial camp and cultivator camp remained relatively quiet after their previous devastating war, in which one side had lost 11 ancestors while the other had lost many territories and numerous source worlds. Both sides were recovering. The infinite ancestor, one of the top 3 powers of the innate primordial camp, was extremely grateful for the war because it had finally seen the hope of reaching the undying and undying realm. During Luo Feng's origin Great Destruction, the infinite ancestor had focused on rescuing its companions while its endless light endured the terrifying impact. The energy storm had swept across dozens of ancestors and severely injured 26 of them. By witnessing the true power of the endless light, the infinite ancestor understood its path forward. It realized that to possess infinite might, it needed to become even purer, eventually integrating its life core completely into the light. Then its life core would exist everywhere and could appear within any ray of light in the endless primordial space, allowing it to become truly undying and undying. With the resources it had accumulated over countless eras, it began guiding the transformation of its life core. Although the process remained extremely difficult and full of obstacles, the silent extinction ancestor, one of the 9 emperors and one of the top 3 powers of the innate primordial camp, was also searching for a path toward undying and undying but had found no clear hope. After exploring every possibility, it believed that the only path with a glimmer of hope was to first return to silent extinction and seek immortality through extinction. However, the chance of complete death was probably more than 99%. So it was unwilling to take the risk. Its strength already rivaled that of the Cultivator Lords, and even if the Cultivator Lords joined forces, they could not kill it, making it unwilling to gamble its existence on a path with such an overwhelming death rate. In the Cultivator Camp's land of origin, Yuan was studying the legacy Luo Feng had written. He was delighted because Luo Feng's research into origin was among the best in the entire endless primordial space. Yuan's primordial rule operation path became stronger as he comprehended more divine king ultimate realm paths. But his attempt to create a source world had failed. A source world required not only rule operation but also the integration of multiple Daos into origin. Luo Feng's path used the life and death origin, while Yuan needed to combine multiple great Daos into origin. A source world required at least 9 great Daos to be combined into origin, making his system much more complicated than Luo Feng's life and death origin. Although the path was difficult, Yuan was very pleased because Luo Feng's detailed research on the origin system had shown him the direction. If he succeeded, combining the origin system inside with rule operation outside would create a true qualitative transformation, allowing the internal and external aspects to become one and enabling him to create a source world. At least, the path ahead had become clear. So Yuan continued cultivating in seclusion. The 8 cultivator lords each continued with their own affairs. Starlight diligently repaired the spacetime net. Jin once again explored the abyss of destruction alone. Mo Man continued roaming the endless primordial space in ripple form. Wulin leisurely nurtured his bloodline descendants. And Luo Feng comprehended the primordial blade path within the Blood Crane territory. Unknowingly, 3,000 eras passed. After 3 millennia, Luo Feng encounters a bottleneck in his cultivation. From the Blood Crane territory, he observes a remote source world outside the cultivator territory, where creatures cultivate without any complete inheritance and face constant danger from world-level primordials and ancestors. A creature from that world becomes the first to reach the ultimate realm of the godly king and breaks through the source world membrane wall to explore the infinite primordial space. Lord Mo Man appears and guides him away, while Mo Man and Starlight Lord continue searching for and guiding talented cultivators from countless source worlds outside the cultivator territory. Luo Feng understands that the 3,600 world groups are only a small, densely populated region of the infinite primordial space, while countless other source worlds exist in even vaster regions. Because the cultivator camp cannot protect them all, countless creatures and even entire source world origins are repeatedly devoured by world-level primordials and ancestors. Luo Feng realizes that, despite being a lord, he is still unable to save most of them because of the enormous distances and the limited strength of the cultivator camp. with only 8 lords guarding the 3,600 world groups while facing constant wars. Attempting to protect all source worlds would likely cause the innate primordial camp, the Ice Peak camp, and countless weaker forces to unite and crush the cultivator camp. Luo Feng therefore recognizes that he is still too weak and is uncertain whether he ranks among the top 10 in the infinite primordial space. His current bottleneck lies in the primordial blade path. After 3 millennia of continuous progress, he has comprehended about 90% of the path and formed a clear prototype. But he still cannot complete it. His primordial blade path is composed of approximately 87% destruction and 13% life, with the life aspect involving abilities such as life chi mechanism lock, life cutting, and life entanglement, combined with the killing intent lock of destruction. These abilities give him an extremely powerful method of locking onto enemies and pursuing them with increasingly destructive techniques. However, Luo Feng believes that his path still lacks sufficient accumulation and destruction. Although he has studied the cultivator camp's high-level primordial materials, world-level primordial materials, ancestor-level materials, and the inheritances of the other 7 lords, his current focus on destruction requires even greater accumulation. He therefore turns his attention to the abyss of destruction, which originates the sky-splitting saber and contains the greatest concentration of known and unknown destruction power in the entire infinite primordial space. The abyss of destruction is one of the highest-tier mysterious lands, alongside places such as the Land of Eternity and the Fire Prison Wall. Its layers form a vast destruction world, and to become the master of a layer, one must kill through all obstacles within it and imprint one's life mark onto that layer's origin phantom. Almost every ancestor in the infinite primordial space has explored the abyss of destruction, and the deepest layer reached determines the destructive combat ability of many powerful beings. Sha Zhou of the Ice Peak camp is the master of the 27th layer, while Starlight Lord is the master of the 26th layer. Starlight once attempted to break through the 27th layer but failed, showing that his destructive ability is nearly equal to Sha Zhou's. They are recognized as the 2 strongest beings in the infinite primordial space. Demon Ruins, the master of the 22nd layer, ranks below them, while the 23rd through 25th layers remain unclaimed. The other 7 lords also occupy different layers. Yuan is in the 19th layer, Mo Man in the 13th, Jin in the 12th, Ming Huang in the 11th, Nai Ji Yu in the 9th, and Wulin in the 7th. Based on their achievements in the abyss of destruction, Starlight is recognized as one of the top 2 in strength. Yuan is considered among the top 10, and the other lords generally rank within the top 20. However, this ranking mainly reflects killing ability and is unfavorable to beings who specialize in defense and survival. The initial ancestor, for example, possesses the strongest defense but has mediocre killing ability and could not even pass the first layer, while Wulin's powerful attacks allow him to occupy the 7th layer despite being slower and less skillful. Nevertheless, all forces understand that beings who specialize in defense and life, such as the initial ancestor, Wulin, and Luo Feng, may be more valuable during critical situations. Since Luo Feng needs to strengthen his accumulation in destruction and hopes to overcome the bottleneck preventing him from fully mastering the primordial blade path, he decides to enter the abyss of destruction, carrying the sky-splitting saber. His main battle avatar leaves the Blood Crane territory and heads toward the abyss of destruction.